Well, guys, after a lot of frustration and confusion, American Horror Story Apocalypse finally comes to an end, but was it the satisfying ending that we were all hoping for? Let's find out.
Don't change the channel, don't touch that dial. We got it all on UHF. Kick off your
Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for this season finale of American Horror Story Apocalypse. And as expected, going into this finale, I was very skeptical. I really did not know how this was going to turn out. As you guys know, I have not been that happy with the way this season has been going. I think it has been way too slow-paced. It has been very much just a lot of build-up and not enough payoff. And I was worried because of how long we've been in flashback mode that this episode was going to feel very rushed and that it wasn't going to give us that necessary payoff that we needed. And you know, maybe it's because of the fact that the last few episodes have been really slow and a lot hasn't been happening, that's why this episode was actually one of the better episodes this season for me. I actually really like this episode a lot. In fact, I think this is one of the better finales American Horror Story has done, which, as we know, is something that they very much struggle with, is how to conclude a season, and that's something I think they actually did pretty well here. But we're just going to jump into it right now. So, while the past few reviews, I've structured it as positive, negative, this episode is mostly positive for me. There are a couple things I don't like here and there, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but I want to get into the things that I really enjoyed about this finale. So, right off the bat, the thing I will say that I really loved about this finale is that things finally happened here. We finally went back to the present day. We got to see how that whole thing played out, and I was very happy about that. Now, I'm not really going to talk about the things that happened in the past because we know what happens there. We know that Cordelia and, you know, we know that Cordelia ends up wiping Coco and Mallory's memories, and, you know, any sort of trace of their ties to the Coven is basically gone. They then have to go about playing these other personalities and until the apocalypse happens, and that's basically everything that we knew. So that is the one thing that I will get into a little bit later, is that I do think this episode maybe spent a little too much time on that because we already knew. Regardless, though, it was really cool to see that confrontation, you know, finally play out from the events of Episode 4. In fact, I actually rewatched the first scene of Episode 4 prior to this, and it's basically a rinse and repeat of what we saw, where they meet up with them, they tell them that they've been placed under this identity spell, and that it's starting to wear off, and that, you know, essentially, you know, Michael and Meade, they end up running into them, they're gonna have this whole magic fight, and the only difference is this time we actually do get to see it play out, and it didn't necessarily go the way I expected it to, but I still really enjoyed this scene a lot. I mean, it was full-on chaos in a way that this season just hasn't been. In fact, that whole fight between the witches and Michael and Meade, I have not felt that urgency since the first scene of this season, which I still say is one of the best scenes this show has ever accomplished. And I don't think this was necessarily on that level, but I still felt that same bit of intensity. Anything could go wrong, anything could happen there, and a lot of things did happen, and I was very happy with the way that did turn out. I like that we got to see a lot of characters die in this scene. You know, we get to see Coco die. We see, we see Meade explode, which was amazing to watch. I love the way that was done. We see Madison almost kills Michael, but he then blows off her head, and what a graphic scene. I mean, honestly, this has been one of the more tamer seasons. In this episode, they really did not hold back. There was a lot of graphic stuff throughout this episode, and I really loved the way that was done. That was fantastic. I really loved, I mean, obviously, I don't want to see Madison die because I feel like she really has turned over a new leaf this season where she has been a lot more on the right side of things. Unfortunately, though, it's been one of the more underutilized arcs, but I feel like Madison is one of those characters where they really have brought her full circle, and I did think this was a good ending for her. You know, she dies getting to protect her sisters. She dies sacrificing herself, and I did think it was a very well done. Again, it was silly the way it was done, but I thought it was a very good death overall, and I did like the way that was done. But for me, the most epic scene of this entire thing is where they decide to go with Dinah, because the big question is, after what we saw last week, why would the Coven ever think of possibly sparing Dinah? And when really seeing how it plays out in context, it actually makes a lot of sense. As we know, Dinah had this talk show, and Myrtle was ready to burn her at the stake, just right then and there. But they decided they weren't going to do that because they didn't want Michael to get word of what their plans were. They thought this would disrupt their plans, and they decided to spare her. And what they end up doing, I thought, was far more profound than they really could have, because we see finally at the, in this episode, at the 11th hour, they're, basically we see that she's about to say, well, I'm the Voodoo Queen, you can't take me down. Marie Laveau steps in. Yes, Marie Laveau. Even though Angela Bassett said she was not going to be a part of the season, she does step in at the last moment, cuts her sister's throat, and that scene was incredible. I love what we got there. In theory, did we really need to see Marie Laveau this season? No, the Voodoo Witches weren't a huge part of it, but like I said, what we had with Dinah before, the Voodoo Witches were such a prominent part of Coven that if they weren't a part of this season, I feel like something would be missing. It would feel as if, they would have forgotten that. So I did like that scene with Marie Laveau where she ends up slitting her sister's throat, and we realize that she's now working in solidarity with the witches, and I think that in general, it's a good, it's a good way to show how far we've come since Coven. In Coven, it was very much Voodoo Witches versus the Robichaux Academy, and I like seeing that these two have joined forces to take down a greater threat, and I did think that was actually a very effective scene. It was really cool to see Angela Bassett again. I did not realize how much I needed to see Marie Laveau, and I really love what they end up doing here. But like I said, this really leads us to that big battle where literally everyone is just getting killed. We see Coco, she might possibly take Michael out, but we see that Billie Eichner ends up coming out, which we forgot about this character. We forgot, I can't remember his name, but the person that was Coco's husband, which we actually found out how they met in this episode, which was kind of superfluous overall, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But he comes out and he actually ends up stabbing Mallory before she can get to Michael. We also see Coco is killed in this as well. And again, these are characters that I definitely didn't want to see die, Mallory especially. But seeing Coco die, we'll get to her a little bit later. But like I said, I really like in this scene that just everything's on the line. Anything could happen at this moment. And the scene where Mallory is in the bathtub, she's about to come, she's about to go back in time, but she can't do it. She needs a sacrifice, and that sacrifice, unfortunately, needs to be Cordelia. And this is something that I think we all kind of saw coming. I've said before that I have not really been a fan of how they've been handling the whole Cordelia weakening arc and how she had to give up, her life for Mallory. It just seemed a little too quick. The way they did this, though, made a lot of sense, because obviously Mallory is the one who needs to time travel. Mallory is the one who needs to be able to go back in time, and seeing Cordelia sacrifice herself in front of Myrtle, someone who is very much a maternal figure to her, was devastating to watch, but Sarah Paulson just killed it in that scene. I love the way that scene was done, where she tells Michael, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of killing me. You are going to watch me die, but it is not going to satisfy you, because I'm going to die on my own terms. And truly, we did get that show-off between Cordelia and Michael that we all thought we were going to get, and I thought it was extremely effective the way that was done. For sure, some of Cordelia's best work this entire season. I've liked the Cordelia character this season, I just haven't really been a huge fan of the way she's been handled, but this scene really made up for it, and I really love what they end up doing with her here. Now, however, we get to the more negative stuff in this episode, because like I said, there was a lot of stuff I liked here, but I really can't talk about the way the rest of this episode plays out without me getting into the more negative stuff here. Which I will say, everyone was waiting for that big showdown between Michael and Mallory, and while that scene was very effective, Michael's death, I thought, was a little bit lame and just wasn't really worth the build-up this entire season. They really made it seem like it was going to be like a Harry Potter sort of thing where you would see those two just duke it out and there would be this whole just this brawl of magic, and I really wanted to see that, and instead what we got is a hit and run. Now, I get what they were trying to do here. You know, they were trying to kill Michael when he was at his weakest point and things like that, because we saw, obviously, in the present-day timeline, he has grown too overpowered to the point where he simply cannot be killed. Anything that could kill him, it's not possible. I mean, the scene where he, you know, we see that Coco stabs him in the back, and we think that that might kill him, but then he goes and eats Marie's heart. I mean, sure, that does show that he is immortal. So in theory, this does make sense. It's just, you know, the build up to all this, it just didn't seem like this is where we were headed. We have this scene between him and Constance. We go all the way back to 2015, you know, when she catches him. He's now killed that priest or whatever, and she just starts wailing on him. And I will say, Jessica Lange, once again, killed it in this episode. Obviously, she killed it. She kills it in pretty much every single season that she's been in. It was really cool to see her again here. Just in the end, I really did not understand why this was when they need to kill Michael. I get it that they wanted to kill him when he was at his weakest point, but Constance really has not been that major a part of Michael's life. Michael never really seemed like he missed her all that much. Michael never really seemed like he really cared for Constance, and maybe it's just because Michael's character was kind of all over the place this season. But it never really felt like he cared that much about Constance. It felt like he cared about Meade much more. So this scene, while well done, just wasn't as rewarding as it should have been. I really wish Constance would have put him in that murder house, and she ended up not doing so. And I do think that was a missed opportunity overall. I think it would have been a really great way to close out, you know, to close out his arc, really. Instead of Constance having to kill herself, it's Michael, and she has the satisfaction when knowing that he's in the house forever. It would have been a very effective scene, but she basically lets him there to rot and die, and I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to use, you know, Michael getting hit by a car and use that as a parallel to Addie getting hit by the car. It was the same exact position, which that was something I didn't realize until I read some, you know, some stuff and things like that, but I thought that was really cool. I really love the way that was done. It's just, you know, what we were leading up to, this did not feel as final as it really should have, and I just feel like this battle, it should have been a lot more epic, and it just really wasn't here. I still liked the way he died. It's just, you know, what we were setting up with Mallory, it seemed like it was going to be a lot more epic, and it just really wasn't. On the other side of the negatives is Coco. I really don't understand the point of this character, and that's not really a problem with this episode. It's a problem with this season overall, because they made it seem like it was a big deal that she had this calorie power, and that was somehow going to come into play, and it never did. Obviously, we had the scene where Madison said that she was the weakest among them and things like that, but the fact that she was just killed by Michael, it just makes her entire character feel pointless. I really don't know why she needed to be here, other than just to fill time with humor, and that's really all she really contributed to this season, and once again, I really think you could have just killed her along with Mr. Gallant and some of the other characters, and it really would not have mattered, because she really served no purpose this season whatsoever in the end of it, and I don't know why they needed to keep her here. It seemed like they're, you know, again, it seemed like they were leading to something with her, and unfortunately, they really just didn't do that here. Also, I do understand why they ended up going in the direction that they did, but the idea that Cordelia, Madison, and Myrtle ended up burying themselves for 2 years, it's just a little too implausible for me to believe. I mean, what, they were underground for 2 years, and they just waited until everyone was killed? Like, I didn't really understand how this worked. Like, how did they know the right time to emerge out of the ground? I really don't get it. Was the spell supposed to wear off at that time? They didn't do as good of a job as explaining it. It still was an epic scene, seeing them, like, arise and things like that. But the fact that they were just buried in the ground for 2 years, I just wish we got a little bit more backstory there. And again, I think they could have done a lot more with that overall. In the end, I was happy with the final scene. I like the way things are wrapped up, where basically, you know, time has been undone. Mallory is basically a save the day. We have that really great scene with her and Cordelia, and we kind of get a repeat with her, you know, bringing that butterfly back to life and things like that, which I thought was really cool. And at the end of things, we see Misty is brought back, because I guess Mallory, she was able to pull in some favors with Papa Legba and Nan brings Misty back, and it was a very effective scene to bring her back. But once again, I don't know why Misty really had to come back this season. I understand that they wanted to get Lily Ray back, but in the end of it, it really did not seem like Misty was that integral to anything. It seemed like Cordelia wanted to bring her back to help them fight, you know, Michael, but Misty did not contribute to that at all. And I did like that Misty got a happy ending, but it just didn't really work as well as it could have. That being said, the scene where we realize that Myrtle Snow is not back, and that because of, you know, there being no danger within the coven, you know, it makes sense why she's not brought back. And it was kind of sentimental to see the picture of Myrtle Snow juxtaposed to actually seeing Myrtle Snow in the Robichaux Academy, and I did enjoy that overall. But everything pretty much is back to normal. You know, Zoe's teaching. We see Mallory even is able to stop Queenie before she is going to the Hotel Cortez, which I thought was kind of cool, the way they kind of tied that back in there. You know, we get to see Madison is still stuck in that department store. They're going to let her wait it out a little bit, which I really didn't think was deserving. I mean, Madison, like I said, she's been one of the more consistently good characters this season, and I don't know why they wanted to leave her trapped in there. Like, sure, she was a complete bitch in Coven. I understand that, but this season, she was a lot better, and I don't know why they wanted to just leave her there, but either way, that's really how things do play out. However, that's still not the ending, because the way this season ends, I thought was, you know, this was something that I really thought they were going to just let be a plot hole. They weren't going to delve any deeper into this, but we end the season the same way we started, with Timothy and Emily. And the way they ended up doing this culminates in one of the bleakest endings in American Horror Story history, where we see these two meet, obviously not in the outpost anymore, but they now meet at like this coffee sort of protest that's going on. I guess she worked at like this coffee shop and they were getting underpaid or whatever. So they end up meeting, they get married, they have this child, and immediately you know something is off with the child. Well, it turns out the child is actually now taking over for Michael. Yes, these two basically were the were the plants for this child. They planted this child, and now they have, you know, produced the spawn of Satan, and this was extremely effective, the way this ended, where we get that scene that is so similar to Murder House, where they walk in on their 3-year-old son. He has killed the babysitter, and they're looking at him, and I think he has the exact same pose as Michael did at the end of Murder House. We see at the end, Mead and all of them are knocking at the door, and they're going to take this child, who probably is going to become even more powerful than Michael. And basically because of this, we get, like I said, one of the bleakest endings ever, where the show is basically telling us that this is inevitable. Whether Mallory changes it or not, the witches are always going to have to fight against Michael. They're always going to have to fight against the Antichrist. Whether it's Michael, whether it's Timothy and Emily's son, there really is no way to change it. It always is going to happen. It's always going to come down to those two having to battle it out, and it's one of the saddest endings we've seen in American Horror Story, but considering how overly happy they usually make their endings, I was actually really impressed with the way this was done. The fact that they went here was so ballsy, and is probably one of my favorite things about this entire season. You know, Timothy and Emily, I did not think that they were going to tie that up at all, but the fact that we actually got something with them to close it out, I thought was extremely effective, and I really love the way it ended overall. And look, sure, people can maybe complain about this, that, oh, this wasn't set up enough, but we've known basically from the first 2 episodes that there was something special about Timothy and Emily. There had to have been a specific reason why they were chosen, and now it makes sense. You know, Michael being as powerful as he is, you may think, well, how would he know that they're going to carry the vessel? They're going to be the vessel of Satan. Well, you know, I think it's one of those things where Michael was so powerful that he very well could have known that, you know, there must be a plan B somewhere, and that maybe he would have recruited them or something like that. Like, again, that is something that they could have done better with, but in the end, they do serve a greater purpose, and that they end up being the vessel for the spawn of Satan. And I think that is way more effective than what they really could have ended up doing with them. And I definitely really love that overall. And it really does go back to the poster of the season, which, as we know, is this like devilish hand cradling a baby. And that goes all the way back to this scene right here. It really does show that this was purposeful all along. This was exactly why we spent time with Timothy and Emily, to get us to care about them and to see how innocent and pure they were, and that someone this pure could produce something that is so devilish and evil. I think is just really phenomenal the way it's done. It was bleak and very and like I said, it was very bleak and very cynical in a way that American Horror Story just simply isn't usually, and that's something I really loved about this overall. So yeah, at the end of the day, this was a much better finale than expected. They actually did a really good job of tying up basically every loose end, you know, starting off with the witches and then circling back to Timothy and Emily, who I really thought they were just going to negate and just leave as one of the many plot threads that Ryan Murphy just leaves unnoticed a lot of the time. And for once, they actually didn't do that. And that was something that really did impress me. For a season that I'm not the happiest with, this was actually a pretty decent finale overall. I really did like the way this did pay off. That being said, the season overall still isn't the most satisfying. The finale did make up for largely a lot of the things that I was complaining about, but there still are quite a few things that I wish they could have dived into a bit more. First of all, as much as I did enjoy the stuff in Robichaux Academy, which, again, I don't want to act like I didn't. I know it seemed like these last few weeks like I was bored, but I did like seeing these characters again. I like seeing Cordelia. I like seeing Madison again, especially what they did with Madison. I thought was really well done. Mallory was a rock-solid character. Zoe, Queenie, I like seeing them again. The problem is, I thought there was way too much of that this season, and I think it was a mistake to start that in episode 4. To me, I think it would have made a lot more sense to have the first 5 episodes in Outpost 3, and then the last 5 be the Robichaux Academy. This way, you still could have gotten a lot of the character stuff, you know, with Mallory and with, you know, Timothy and Emily. You still could have gotten the stuff with Mr. Gallant. You still could have gotten the stuff with Adina. It just would have been a little bit more expanded upon. And then on the Robichaux side of things, you still could have gotten that Murder House episode. You still could have had all the great stuff with the witches and developing Mallory's powers more. It would have felt a bit more complete. I definitely could have done without that Michael-centric episode. That easily could have just been like a subplot in episode 7, and for some reason they just decided not to do that. And I think it just would have made the season a lot better overall, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that I just feel were missed opportunities. A lot of characters this season where I'm just kind of scratching my head as to, like, what was really the point of them? Like, for example, the 2 guys who gave Michael the idea, you know, the 2 idiots, Jeff and Mutt. I mean, we don't really know what the point of them was. The last time we see them was that scene with Myrtle Snow, which I really enjoyed. The fact that she couldn't kill them I thought was very good, but I kept thinking we were going to come back to them, and I guess we don't. I mean, I guess that eventually they'll run into Timothy and Emily's son and they'll give him the same idea, but I don't know. It just feels a little bit too far-fetched to me. I think they could have done more with them. Same with a lot of the witches in Robichaux Academy. I thought were really underused because really the only one that had, like, in terms of the returning characters, the only one that had a satisfying arc besides Cordelia was Madison. And maybe that was what they were trying to do. They were trying to redeem her, but because of that, characters like Zoe and Queenie really got the short end of the stick here. There was really nothing given to either of them, and they were so prominent in Coven that I really thought we would have had more with them this season, and they didn't. There was not a single mention of Kyle, Evan Peters' character. I would have thought at least we would have got a mention with him. There was really nothing going on with Zoe. We never really referenced Marie Laveau until this episode. Most of it was Dinah. And I understand, obviously, that Angela Bassett was busy on 911, but they still, I think, could have done a better job with giving these characters that we love more to do. This season was promised as a Coven and Murder House crossover, and it really wasn't. It really was just Coven 2.0 that also happened to be the origin story for Michael, and I think that was honestly a really big mistake for Ryan Murphy to say, oh, this is going to be both of them, because the Murder House side of things, sure, we got in one episode, and what we got was satisfying, but let's face it, this was not really a Murder House crossover. It was very much a Coven thing, and I think that's something that they could have been a lot more clearer with. There's just, I would have liked a little bit more clarity with some things. Also, when it comes to Outpost 3, this episode just made me wish we would have spent a little bit more time there. Like, maybe the episode 9 should have had ended with us going back to that scene of Outpost 3. I think it would have been a lot more effective if they did that. I kept thinking that the scene where Michael is killing everyone, that's how episode 9 should have ended, and then Mallory goes back in time, and then we see her go back. I mean, that would have been so epic if they would have decided to do that, but unfortunately, they just didn't. And again, that is one of the problems with the finale, is that a lot of it was very redundant, especially like the first, like, you know, not the first like 15 minutes I thought were very redundant, telling us stuff that we already knew and things like that. And again, there were a lot of things in Outpost 3 that they could have maybe expanded upon more. Like, what really was the point of the sanctuary? What was that Michael was really talking about? You know, remember he was telling everyone, I'm going to bring you to this sanctuary. We never really discovered what that was. You know, what was really the deal with the cubes and all that stuff that Venable was doing. I mean, sure, like Jeff and Mudd said, oh, you could do whatever, but we never really got a good explanation of that. Who set off the bombs? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, wasn't answered. And I know I'm nitpicking here, but I just wish they would have delved a little bit more into it. It's mainly because I think the ending was so strong that I think it could have been even stronger, and I would have wanted more there. But the things I did like about this season are very strong. Mallory especially, I think, is one of the best new characters this show has had in years. I really love what they did with her. I thought that she really gave Billie Lourd a very dynamic character, especially making up for Winter, who I've said so many times before was very all over the place for me. Mallory was a much more consistent character in that regard, and I did like where they ended up going with her. Albeit, I still wish that they would have done a little bit more with her and Michael. I mean, we were told very early on and shown that this is the only person that Michael fears. Michael does fear Mallory, and I really would have just, you know, they still could have done the thing where she runs him over, but if they would have had some sort of battle prior to this, I think it would have been a lot more epic, and unfortunately, that was a missed opportunity. I think they could have delved a lot more into sort of the dynamic between Michael and Mallory, how he sees her, how she sees him, because a lot of the time this season did feel a bit unfocused with, like, okay, who's the main character here? Is it Michael? Is it Mallory? Is it Cordelia? And that happens a lot in American Horror Story, but this is one of the first seasons in a while where that really was a problem. It wasn't like Roanoke where, you know, Lee was the main character this entire time, and it never felt that way. Like, Mallory always felt like a prominent character since episode 3, but I just wish they would have spent a little bit more time on things, and unfortunately, they just really didn't. But the things that were consistent this season, like I said, Mallory is a character I really enjoyed. I did enjoy a lot of the stuff we did get with the witches, the battle between them and the warlocks. I thought was a very compelling conflict. Michael, despite the fact of who played him and the fact that, you know, the last few episodes he was kind of insufferable, he was a good character. I liked where they ended up going with the character of Michael. It's just the way that he ended up. I just thought he turned into kind of just a whiny little bitch and just wasn't really someone I feared. I didn't really fear. I feared him a little bit in this last episode, but you know, 7, 8, and 9 especially, he was very insufferable, and I think they could have done a better job, especially with casting him. Cody Fern just never really convinced me of his menace, and I just never really bought into him being the Antichrist. But really, overall, while it did seem like I was this point with the season, I enjoyed the season enough to where I can say I'm satisfied. The finale was good enough where I like the way they ended things. You know, I was not expecting them to end things the way they did, but it really does make a lot of sense, you know, how inevitable things are and how even if you change the past, you know, you can't change this one event. It's just something that is destined to happen. And I did like the way that they explored that. And it makes sense with episode 9 where even if Mallory does try to warn Anastasia, Anastasia is still going to be killed. And I think they still did a really good job with that overall. So at the end of the day, I can say that I enjoyed the season. There's just a lot more I wish they would have delved into, and I do think that it could have made the season even better. It started off really strong. It struggled a bit in the middle, but at the end, it was actually a very strong finish, and I was overall satisfied by it. It's not the best season or everything. Everyone's saying, oh, this is the best season for me. I do still think last season was a little bit better. It was a little bit more simplistic. It stuck to a less is more sort of approach. It did crumble a bit towards the end, but the story itself was a lot more consistent, and I think this season just wasn't that for me. It could have been a lot more consistent. I think they should have put the focus a little bit more on one character, and like I said, I really think this season would have benefited more if the first 5 was Outpost 3, and the first 5 was Robichaux, and the last 5 was Robichaux Academy. I know that's very similar to the way that Roanoke did it, but I think that approach would have worked a lot better to this season, and I think it just would have made a lot more sense if they did that. But overall, guys, I did enjoy the season overall. So I am going to give the finale of American Horror Story Apocalypse, Episode 10, Apocalypse Then, a B, and I am going to give the season overall a B-. Like I said, I know it really seemed like I wasn't enjoying the season at all towards the end, but it just was very frustrating. But it ended up being a little bit more satisfying than I expected to be. But that's really this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Most guys saw this finale overall and the season. Love to hear your thoughts, and it will see you guys in my next video, and it will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.